What would you do if a billionaire showed up at your door in a wedding dress begging you to save her? That's exactly what happened to Ethan Cole on the worst night of his life. One text message, one soaked wedding gown, one impossible choice that would destroy everything he knew about love, loyalty, and survival. This is the story of a single father who bet his entire future on a woman the world wanted to break. A fake marriage that became devastatingly real, and a battle against greed, betrayal, and a family empire built on lies. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The rain hit Ethan Cole's windshield like gravel thrown by an angry hand. He squinted through the blur, knuckles white against the steering wheel, trying to keep his truck from hydroplaning across the flooded two-lane road leading out of Greystone. The wipers couldn't keep up. Neither could his mind. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He shouldn't have looked. Not in this weather, not at 60 miles per hour with visibility down to maybe 20 feet. But something made him glance down anyway, maybe instinct, maybe exhaustion, maybe the same reckless impulse that had gotten him into trouble his whole life. The screen lit up with a number he didn't recognize. Then a second text arrived. "Come pick me up, I wore the dress." Ethan's foot slammed on the brake before his brain could process the words. The truck fishtailed, tires screaming against wet asphalt, and for one terrible second he thought he was going over the embankment. Then the wheels caught traction, and the vehicle shuddered to a stop sideways across both lanes. His chest heaved, rain hammered the roof. He stared at the phone. "I wore the dress." There was only one person in the world who would send him that message. Only one person who knew about the joke he'd made 3 weeks ago inside the crumbling ballroom of the Sinclair Grand Hotel. A joke that wasn't really a joke at all. Victoria Sinclair, billionaire heiress, CEO of a hospitality empire that owned half the luxury properties on the East Coast. A woman so far out of his league that even saying her full name felt like trespassing. And she was wearing a wedding dress. Ethan grabbed the phone with shaking hands and called the number. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, she picked up. "Ethan." Her voice was barely audible over the storm. "I need you to come get me." "Where are you?" "The estate. I'm—" Static crackled through the line. "I'm outside the gates. I can't go back in. Please. I don't have anyone else." He heard something break in her voice on that last word. Not crying. Worse than crying. The sound of someone who'd run out of options and knew it. "Victoria, what happened?" "I'll explain when you get here. Just, please, tell me you meant it." Ethan closed his eyes. He knew exactly what she was asking. 3 weeks ago, he'd been standing on scaffolding inside her family's historic inn, inspecting water damage in the ceiling beams, when she'd told him the bank was threatening foreclosure unless she secured emergency financing. She'd looked so tired, so small despite the expensive suit and the perfectly styled hair. And before he could stop himself, he'd said something stupid. "Marry me. Then you'd have a husband with contractor insurance and the bank would see you're serious about restoration." She'd laughed. A real laugh. Surprised and genuine. The first time he'd heard her sound like an actual person instead of a corporate press release. "Are you proposing, Mr. Cole?" "I'm problem-solving, Miss Sinclair." She'd smiled at him then, sad and grateful and completely unreachable. "You're sweet. But I don't think marrying the repair guy would impress the board of directors." He'd shrugged and gone back to work. She'd left 20 minutes later in a black town car. He'd figured that was the end of it. Now she was standing outside her family estate in a wedding dress, calling him in the middle of a thunderstorm. "I meant it," Ethan said quietly. Every word. The relief in her exhale was heartbreaking. "Then come get me, quickly, before they realize I'm gone." The line went dead. Ethan sat there for 5 seconds, rain battering the truck, trying to figure out if he'd lost his mind. Then he threw the vehicle into gear and spun back toward Greystone. Boutique. The Sinclair estate sat on 200 acres of old-growth forest at the edge of town, surrounded by stone walls that had been standing since before the Civil War. Ethan had only been out here once, years ago, to bid on a renovation project he'd never gotten. Back then, the place had looked untouchable, perfect, like something out of a magazine. Now, through the rain and darkness, it just looked lonely. He pulled up to the main gates and killed the engine. At first, he didn't see her. Then lightning crackled across the sky, and he spotted a figure standing just outside the wrought iron entrance, pressed against the stone pillar like she was trying to disappear into it. Ethan grabbed his jacket from the passenger seat, shoved open the door, and ran. Victoria Sinclair looked like a ghost. The wedding dress clung to her body, soaked through, the lace train dragging in the mud. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face. No shoes, no jewelry. Just a woman in a ruined gown, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. Ethan didn't ask questions. He just pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Come on, let's get you out of here." She didn't move. "Victoria, I left him at the altar." Her voice was flat, empty. "In front of 300 people. My entire family, the board, the investors, everyone." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Who?" "Richard Langford, the banker, the one financing the refinancing deal." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "The one who was supposed to save everything." "Jesus." "Damien set it up. My stepbrother. He's been planning this for months. Marry me off to Langford, consolidate the family assets, squeeze me out of the company, and take the land for himself." She looked up at Ethan, and for the first time he saw the fear underneath the exhaustion. "I couldn't do it. I stood there in front of the priest, and I couldn't." Another crack of lightning, closer this time. "So I ran." Ethan reached for her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Good," he said simply. She stared at him. "Good?" "Yeah, good. You didn't sell yourself to some asshole banker. That's a win in my book." "I just destroyed my company, Ethan. I humiliated my family. Her voice cracked. "I don't know what to do." He squeezed her hand. "Right now. You get in the truck, you get warm, and we figure out the rest later." For a long moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, she nodded. They didn't talk on the drive back. Victoria sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in his jacket, staring out the window at the storm. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel and tried not to think about what he'd just done. He'd picked up a runaway bride. A billionaire runaway bride who'd just ditched her fiancé in the middle of a wedding designed to save her empire. This was insane. He should turn around, take her to a hotel, call her family, let them sort it out. But every time he glanced over at her, saw the way she was holding herself together with sheer willpower, he knew he wouldn't. When they finally pulled up outside his house, a small 2-bedroom rental on the outskirts of town, Victoria looked at it like she'd never seen anything like it before. "This is where you live?" "Yeah, it's not much, but it's dry." He killed the engine. "Come on, I'll make coffee." Inside, the house was quiet and dark. Ethan's daughter was spending the week with her grandparents in Pennsylvania, which meant the place felt emptier than usual. He flipped on the kitchen light and immediately wished he'd cleaned up before leaving that morning. Dishes in the sink, mail piled on the counter, a half-finished mug of cold coffee next to the toaster. Victoria stood in the doorway, dripping onto the linoleum, looking completely out of place. "Bathroom's down the hall," Ethan said. "There's towels in the closet. I'll find you something dry to wear." She nodded, but didn't move. "Victoria, why did you come?" Her voice was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. "You didn't have to. You could have ignored the text, but you drove out there in the middle of a storm to pick up a woman you barely know. Why?" Ethan set his keys on the counter. He didn't have a good answer, or maybe he did, and he just wasn't ready to say it out loud. "Because you asked." She looked at him for a long time. Then, without another word, she walked past him toward the bathroom. 20 minutes later, Victoria emerged wearing one of Ethan's old flannel shirts and a pair of sweatpants that were too big on her. Her hair was still damp but brushed back from her face. Without the dress, without the makeup, without all the armor she usually wore, she looked younger, softer, more real. Ethan handed her a mug of coffee. "Thanks." They sat at the kitchen table. Outside, the storm was finally starting to ease, the thunder moving farther into the distance. "So," Ethan said, "what now?" Victoria wrapped her hands around the mug. "I don't know. I just burned every bridge I had. My family will never forgive me. Langford's probably already pulling his financing. And Damien..." She closed her eyes. "Damien's going to destroy me." "Who is this guy? Your stepbrother?" "Half-brother, technically. His mother married my father when I was 12. Damien's been waiting for his chance to take over the company ever since. She took a sip of coffee. My father left most of the estate to me when he died. Damien got a seat on the board and a trust fund, but not control. He's hated me for it. So he set you up with the banker. He convinced me it was the only option. The company's drowning in debt. The properties need millions in repairs. The board was threatening a vote of no confidence unless I secured emergency financing. And Langford had the money, on the condition that I marry him first. Ethan frowned. That's legal? When you're rich enough, everything's legal. It wasn't a requirement, just a very strong suggestion. Her jaw tightened. Damien told me it was strategic, a merger of assets, but I knew what it really was. I was being sold. And you decided not to go through with it. I stood there looking at Langford's face, and all I could think was, I'll never be free. He'll own me. The company. Everything. She met Ethan's eyes. So I ran. Good. She almost smiled. You keep saying that. Because it's true. You didn't let them control you. That takes guts. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Victoria laughed. It was a small sound, surprised and tired, but real. For the first time since he'd picked her up, she looked like she might actually survive this. Then her expression shifted, became serious again. Ethan, when you made that joke 3 weeks ago about marrying me, he went very still. Were you serious? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. Ethan could have lied, could have laughed it off, told her it was just something stupid he'd said without thinking, but he didn't. Yeah, he said quietly. I was. Victoria stared at him. Why? Because I watched you fight for that inn like it was the only thing keeping you alive. Because you treated me like I mattered, even though I'm just the guy fixing your ceiling. Because... He stopped, swallowed. Because you deserved better than what they were offering you. Silence. Then Victoria set down her coffee mug. What if I said yes? Ethan's heart stopped. What? What if I said yes? To the marriage? Would you still do it? Victoria, I need to know. Her voice was steady now, focused. The bank won't approve refinancing unless I prove I have stable backing. A marriage would do that, especially if it's to someone with contractor credentials and a clean financial record. It would show the board I'm serious about restoration. It would give me time to restructure the debt without Damien forcing me into another corner. She leaned forward. So I'm asking, would you marry me? For real? Ethan's mind was racing. This was crazy. Absolutely insane. Marrying a woman he barely knew to help her fight off a corporate takeover. That wasn't how real life worked. But then he looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the desperation underneath the calm, the fear, the exhaustion of fighting alone for so long. And he realized he'd already made his decision the moment he answered her text. Yeah, he said, I would. Victoria's breath hitched. You'd lose everything if this goes wrong. Your reputation, your business, maybe even custody of your daughter. I know. Then why? Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were still cold. Because somebody needs to be on your side, and I guess that's me. For a long moment, Victoria didn't speak. Then, slowly, she squeezed his hand back. Okay? Okay? Let's do it. Let's get married. Oh. They went to the courthouse the next morning. No dresses, no flowers, no family. Just Ethan in a clean shirt and jeans, Victoria in borrowed clothes that didn't fit, and Ethan's best friend Marcus as their witness. Marcus, a stocky guy with a skeptical face and too much common sense, had spent the entire drive over trying to talk Ethan out of it. This is insane, man. You don't marry someone you barely know. She needs help. She needs a lawyer, not a husband. Marcus, I'm serious. What happens when this blows up? What happens when her family comes after you? What happens when... I'm doing this. Ethan's voice was flat, final. You gonna stand with me or not? Marcus stared at him, then he sighed. You're an idiot. Probably. But you're my idiot. He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. Let's go get you married to a billionaire. What could go wrong? Everything, Ethan thought, but he didn't say it out loud. The ceremony took 11 minutes. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, read through the vows in a monotone voice while Ethan and Victoria stood side by side in front of a fake wood desk. There were no rings, no music, no moment where someone asked if anyone objected. Just paperwork and signatures and the surreal feeling of watching his life change in real time. When the clerk finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Ethan hesitated. Victoria looked up at him. Her eyes were dark and unreadable. "You don't have to," she said quietly. "I know." But he leaned down anyway and pressed a brief, careful kiss to her lips. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, long enough to make it real, not long enough to mean anything. When he pulled back, Victoria was staring at him like she was trying to figure out a puzzle with missing pieces. Then Marcus cleared his throat. "Congratulations, Mrs. Cole." Victoria blinked, turned, extended her hand. "Thank you. And it's still Sinclair, legally and professionally." "Right, of course. Wouldn't want to confuse the board." Marcus shot Ethan a look that clearly said, "You're screwed." Ethan ignored him. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. It felt wrong, like the universe should have acknowledged what had just happened with another storm or an earthquake or something. Instead, it was just a normal Tuesday morning. Victoria stood on the steps, looking at the marriage certificate in her hands like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "So," Ethan said, "what now?" She folded the paper carefully. "Now we make people believe it." The Sinclair Grand Hotel sat on the edge of Greystone's historic district, a sprawling Gothic revival building that had been the crown jewel of the family empire for over a century. 10 stories of weathered limestone and wrought iron, with turrets and balconies, and enough architectural drama to make tourists stop and take pictures. It was also falling apart. Ethan had known that before. He'd seen the structural reports, the water damage, the failing electrical systems. But seeing it now, really seeing it as Victoria's husband instead of just the contractor, hit different. This wasn't just a building. This was what she'd been fighting for. Alone. Victoria walked through the empty lobby with her shoulders back and her chin up, every inch the CEO despite wearing borrowed clothes and no makeup. The staff who passed them in the halls didn't stare. They knew better. But Ethan saw the way they looked at her, curious, confused, a little bit afraid. News traveled fast in a town this small. "My office is on the 5th floor, Victoria said without looking back at him. "We'll need to make a public statement before Damien spins this his way." "What are you going to say?" "The truth. That we got married. That it's legitimate. That the bank should proceed with refinancing as planned." "And your family?" Her expression didn't change. "They'll find out soon enough." They took the old elevator, brass cage, creaking cables, the kind of vintage charm that would have been worth millions if the mechanics weren't half broken. Victoria stood perfectly still during the slow climb, staring at her reflection in the polished metal doors. Ethan watched her. "You okay?" "No." She said it simply, honestly. "But I will be." The doors opened onto a long hallway lined with offices. Most were dark, empty. Signs of a company that had been bleeding staff for months. Victoria's office was at the end. Corner suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the town. A massive mahogany desk that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. And behind it, sitting in her chair like he owned the place, was a man in an expensive suit, Damien Sinclair. He looked up when they entered, and the smile that spread across his face was pure poison. "Victoria, there you are. We've been worried sick." "Have you?" Her voice was ice. "Of course. You disappeared from your own wedding. No note, no explanation. Poor Richard was devastated." Damien's eyes slid to Ethan. "And you brought a guest. How thoughtful." Ethan didn't move, didn't speak, just stood next to Victoria and met Damien's stare without blinking. Damien's smile widened. "Let me guess. This is the contractor, the one you've been spending so much time with." "This is my husband," Victoria said calmly. "Ethan Cole. We were married this morning." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Damien stood slowly. He was tall, taller than Ethan, and carried himself with the kind of arrogance that came from old money and no consequences. His suit probably cost $5,000. His watch probably cost $50. "Your husband?" "Yes. You married a contractor." He said it like he was describing something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. less than 12 hours after abandoning your engagement to one of the most powerful bankers on the East Coast. That's correct. Damien's jaw tightened. For the first time, Ethan saw real anger crack through the polished surface. Are you out of your mind? I'm protecting my interest. By committing fraud? Damien stepped around the desk. Because that's what this is, Victoria. A fake marriage designed to manipulate the board and the bank. And when they find out, it's not fake. Ethan's voice cut through the room like a blade. Damien turned, looked at him properly for the first time. Excuse me? You heard me. It's not fake. We're married, legally, legitimately, and there's nothing you can do about it. Silence. Then Damien laughed. It was an ugly sound. You actually think this is going to work? You think marrying some nobody with a toolbox is going to save her company? I think she doesn't need your permission. Damien's smile disappeared. Careful, Mr. Cole. You have no idea what you've walked into. Maybe not, but I'm a fast learner. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Ethan could feel the threat radiating off Damien like heat off asphalt. This guy was dangerous, connected, used to getting what he wanted. But Ethan had been in worse fights. Finally, Damien stepped back, adjusted his cufflinks. The smile returned, colder than before. Fine. Play your little game. But when this falls apart, and it will, don't say I didn't warn you. He looked at Victoria. The board meets next week. I assume you'll be ready to explain this disaster. I'll be ready. Good. Because I promise you, sister, this marriage won't save you. Nothing will. He walked past them without another word and disappeared down the hallway. Victoria waited until the elevator doors closed before she moved. Then she walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the glass. He's going to destroy us. Ethan came up behind her. Let him try. You don't understand. Damien doesn't just win fights. He erases people. And now you're on his list. So are you. Have been for a while, sounds like. She turned, looked up at him with eyes that were too tired, too scared, too real. Why are you doing this? Really? Ethan didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he did, but he wasn't ready to say it. Not yet. Not when everything was already so fragile. So instead, he just told her the truth. Because you asked, and because nobody should have to fight alone. Victoria stared at him. Then slowly she nodded. Okay. Okay? Let's fight. That night, Ethan moved into the estate. It felt wrong on every possible level. The house was massive, 20 rooms at least, plus servant quarters and a separate guest wing. And Victoria lived in it alone except for a part-time housekeeper who came twice a week. The furniture was antique, the carpets were probably older than he was, and every single room felt like a museum exhibit he wasn't supposed to touch. Victoria showed him to a bedroom on the second floor. This was my father's study before he died. I converted it last year. It has its own bathroom and... She stopped. I'm sorry, this is awkward. Little bit. We can set up boundaries, separate spaces. I just need the bank to believe we're actually living together. I get it, it's fine. She hesitated in the doorway. For what it's worth, thank you for doing this. You already thanked me. I know, but I don't think I really meant it before. Now I do. Ethan set his bag on the bed, looked at her. We're going to figure this out, Victoria. I don't know how yet, but we will. She almost smiled. You sound very sure. I'm good at faking confidence. This time she did smile. Small, tired, but real. Good night, Ethan. Good night. She closed the door. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in this huge freezing house, his new wife, his fake wife, his real wife, his completely confusing wife, was probably doing the same thing. He'd married a woman he barely knew to help her fight a war he didn't understand. He'd bet his entire future on a stranger. And the terrifying part? He didn't regret it. Not even a little. The next morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of hammering. He followed the noise downstairs and found Victoria in the grand ballroom, wearing jeans and an old sweater, pulling up sections of damaged floorboards with a crowbar. What are you doing? She looked up, hair falling in her face, dust streaking her cheek. The gala's in 6 weeks. This floor won't hold 200 people in its current condition. So you're tearing it up yourself? I've done it before. I know where the supports are. She pried up another board. I can't afford to hire a crew right now, not until the refinancing goes through. Ethan stared at her. This woman, this billionaire CEO in designer jeans, was ripping apart her own ballroom floor at 7 in the morning. Move, he said. What? Move. You're going to hurt yourself. He crossed the room and took the crowbar from her hands. I'll do it. Ethan, you don't have to. Yeah, I do. That's why you married me, remember? Contractor insurance and cheap labor. He knelt and started pulling boards. Where's your structural plan? For a moment, she just looked at him. Then she disappeared into the hallway and came back with a rolled set of blueprints. They worked together for the next 4 hours. Victoria marked damaged sections. Ethan pulled boards and checked the supports underneath. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. There was something almost peaceful about the rhythm of it, the work, the focus, the shared purpose. Around noon, Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression went cold. It's the bank. She answered. This is Victoria Sinclair. Ethan couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he watched Victoria's face shift from neutral to tense to something that looked like relief. Yes, we were married yesterday morning at the Greystone County Courthouse. A pause. No, it's not a publicity stunt. Yes, I can provide documentation. Another pause. Longer this time. I understand. Thank you. I'll have my attorney send everything over this afternoon. She hung up. Well, they're proceeding with the refinancing review, pending verification of the marriage and a formal presentation to the loan committee next month. She looked at Ethan. It worked. The marriage actually worked. You sound surprised. I am. I thought they'd see right through it. Maybe they did. Maybe they just don't care as long as the paperwork's real. Victoria sat down on one of the intact floor sections, phone still in her hand. This buys me time. Not much, but enough. Enough for what? Enough to prove to the board that I can save this company without Damien. Enough to stabilize the properties. Enough to... She stopped, looked up at him. Enough to make this worth it. For you. Ethan set down the crowbar and sat next to her. I'm not keeping score, Victoria. Maybe you should be. Why? So I can bill you for being a decent human? She laughed, sharp and tired. Most people would. I'm not most people. No. She looked at him, really looked at him. You're not. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed. Voices echoed through the empty halls. The estate was too big, too old, too full of ghosts. But sitting there in the dusty ballroom next to a woman who'd bet everything on a stranger's kindness, Ethan felt something shift. This wasn't just about saving a company anymore. This was about saving her. And somehow, without meaning to, he'd already decided that was worth whatever it cost. The marriage certificate sat on the kitchen counter between them, like evidence at a crime scene. 3 days had passed since the courthouse. 3 days of Victoria on conference calls with lawyers, while Ethan tore apart rotted subflooring in the East Wing. 3 days of eating takeout at opposite ends of a dining table built for 20. 3 days of living like polite strangers who happened to share a last name and a mortgage-sized lie. Ethan picked up the document, studying the signatures. His handwriting looked rushed. Hers looked practiced, like she'd signed 1,000 contracts before, and this was just one more. The board meeting's tomorrow, Victoria said from the doorway. She was wearing black slacks and a silk blouse, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look older, corporate, untouchable again. They'll want to meet you. Me? You're my husband. They'll have questions. Ethan set down the certificate. What kind of questions? How we met, how long we've been together, why we got married so quickly. She crossed her arms. They'll be looking for cracks. Damien will make sure of it. So we get our story straight. We need more than a story, Ethan. We need proof, photos, witnesses, something that shows this isn't just a business arrangement. But it is a business arrangement. Victoria's expression flickered, just for a second. Then the mask was back. I know, but they can't know that. Ethan stood, shoving his hands in his pockets. The kitchen felt too big. The whole house felt too big. He'd been here less than a week and already he was suffocating. What do you want me to do? Move your things into my room. He stared at her. What? The housekeeper comes tomorrow morning. She'll notice if we're sleeping in separate bedrooms, and she talks to everyone. Victoria's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. She was gripping her own elbows hard enough to leave marks. It doesn't mean anything. There's a couch. You can take that. But if anyone asks, we need to look like an actual married couple. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to say this was moving too fast, getting too complicated, crossing lines they couldn't uncross. But he'd signed up for this. He'd walked into it with his eyes open. Okay, he said quietly. I'll move my stuff. Relief washed over her face, then guilt. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you... It's fine, Victoria. Really. He grabbed his coffee mug from the counter. I'm going to finish the ballroom floor. You should get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. She nodded, but didn't move. Ethan was halfway to the door when she spoke again. Why aren't you asking for anything? He turned. What? Money. Equity in this company. Legal protection. You married a stranger to help her fight off a corporate takeover, and you haven't asked for a single thing in return. Her eyes were dark and searching. Why? Ethan thought about lying, about saying something easy and forgettable. Instead, he told her the truth. Because you're drowning, and I know what that feels like. And maybe I can't fix everything, but I can keep you from going under. At least for a while. Victoria stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. That's it? That's the whole reason? Yeah. You're either the best person I've ever met or the dumbest. Ethan smiled. Probably both. For the first time since he'd moved in, Victoria almost laughed. It died before it became sound, but it was there. Good night, Ethan. Good night. He walked out before she could see his hands shaking. The next morning, Ethan woke up on a leather couch that cost more than his truck and felt like sleeping on a park bench. Every muscle ached. His neck was stiff, and somewhere across the room, Victoria was already awake, sitting at her vanity in a bathrobe, putting on makeup with the precision of someone preparing for war. You snore, she said without looking at him. You talk in your sleep. She paused mid-brushstroke. What did I say? Nothing I could understand. Sounded like you were arguing with someone. Probably Damien. She went back to her eyeliner. I've been arguing with him in my head since I was 14. Ethan sat up, rubbing his face. The bedroom was massive, bigger than his entire rental house, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate grounds. Morning light poured in like something out of a painting. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it just felt empty. What time's the meeting? 10. We should leave by 9:30. Victoria capped the eyeliner and reached for lipstick. There'll be 12 board members. Most of them have been with the company for 20 years. They don't like change, and they definitely don't like me. Why not? Because I'm 32 and female, and I inherited control instead of earning it. At least, that's what they think. She applied the lipstick in 2 quick strokes. They've been waiting for me to fail since the day my father died. And Damien tells them what they want to hear, that I'm emotional, impulsive, that the company would be better off under experienced leadership. She set down the lipstick and met his eyes in the mirror. Today he's going to tell them I committed fraud by marrying you. Did you? The question hung between them. Victoria turned on the bench to face him directly. Legally, no, the marriage is real, but morally? She paused. I don't know. You tell me. Is it fraud if both people agreed to it? Ethan stood and crossed to the window. Below, groundskeepers were trimming hedges that probably hadn't been touched in months. The estate looked better from a distance. Up close, you could see the cracks. I don't think it's fraud if we're actually trying, he said finally. And I am, trying. So am I. He turned. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Then we're good, he said. Victoria stood, tightening the belt on her robe. I'm going to get dressed. There's a suit in the closet for you. Custom tailored. I had it made yesterday. You had a suit made for me? You can't wear jeans to a board meeting. I don't need charity, Victoria. It's not charity. It's strategy. You're my husband. You need to look the part. She walked past him toward the bathroom. Put it on. Don't argue. The door closed. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring at the closet. Then he opened it and found a charcoal gray suit hanging next to rows of Victoria's designer dresses. The fabric was expensive. He could tell just by touching it. Probably cost more than he made in a month. He put it on anyway. It fit perfectly. The Sinclair corporate headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a converted textile mill downtown. Exposed brick, industrial windows, the kind of aesthetic that cost a fortune to make look effortlessly old. Victoria's heels clicked against the polished concrete as they crossed the lobby toward the elevators. Ethan had never felt more out of place in his life. The suit helped, but he was still a contractor walking into a room full of people who'd spent their entire careers in boardrooms and country clubs. They'd see through him in seconds. "Relax," Victoria murmured as they stepped into the elevator. "You look fine." "I look like I'm playing dress-up." "You look like my husband. That's all that matters." The elevator climbed. Ethan watched the floor numbers tick upward and tried to steady his breathing. "What if they ask questions I can't answer?" "Then I'll answer them." Victoria adjusted her blazer. "Just follow my lead. Don't volunteer information. And whatever you do, don't let Damien get under your skin. He already did that 3 days ago. Then don't let him do it again." The elevator stopped, the doors opened. And there, waiting in the hallway with a smile that could cut glass, was Damien Sinclair. "Victoria, right on time. And you brought your contractor." His eyes swept over Ethan's suit. "Nice outfit. Armani?" "Brioni," Victoria said coolly. "Shall we?" Damien's smile tightened. "After you, sister." The boardroom was exactly what Ethan expected. Long mahogany table, leather chairs, oil paintings of old white men on the walls. 12 people sat around the table, most of them over 60, all of them watching Victoria with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. At the head of the table sat a woman in her 70s with steel gray hair and eyes like a hawk. "Victoria," she said, "please sit." Victoria took the chair to the woman's right. Ethan sat next to her, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. Damien took the seat directly across from them. "For those who haven't met him yet," Victoria said evenly, "this is my husband, Ethan Cole." 12 pairs of eyes turned to him. Ethan nodded. "Good morning." No one responded. The older woman at the head of the table leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Cole? I'm Eleanor Vance, chairman of the board. I'll be direct. This marriage comes as quite a surprise." "I imagine it does. You were married 4 days ago, at a courthouse, with no announcement, no engagement period, and no prenuptial agreement." Eleanor's voice was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. "Can you explain the circumstances?" Ethan glanced at Victoria. She gave him the smallest nod. "Victoria and I have known each other for several months," he said. "I've been consulting on restoration work for the Sinclair Grand Hotel. We got close during the project. When she called off her engagement to Mr. Langford, she turned to me. We decided not to wait." "How romantic," Damien said. His tone suggested the opposite. Eleanor ignored him. "And you're aware of the financial situation facing this company?" "I am. Are you also aware that your marriage conveniently provides Victoria with the stable partnership the bank requires for refinancing approval?" There it was. The trap. Ethan kept his voice steady. "I'm aware the bank has requirements, but I didn't marry Victoria to help her navigate corporate politics. I married her because I love her." The room went silent. Victoria's hand found his under the table, squeezed once. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "You understand this board has a fiduciary responsibility to protect shareholder interests. If we believe this marriage is a fraudulent arrangement designed to manipulate lending institutions, we're obligated to act." "I understand." "Then you won't mind providing evidence of your relationship? Photos, communication records, witness testimony?" "Whatever you need." Damien leaned forward. "I have a question, Mr. Cole." "Go ahead." "Where were you 6 months ago?" Ethan frowned. "What?" "6 months ago? Where were you? What were you doing? Because I've done some research and I can't find a single connection between you and my sister before August. No phone records, no social media interaction, nothing." "We met through work." "Work that began in August, 3 months ago." Damien's smile was venomous. "So either you and Victoria conducted the most secretive courtship in history, or this marriage is exactly what it looks like. A desperate business maneuver disguised as romance." Victoria's hand tightened on Ethan's. "That's enough, Damien," Eleanor said sharply. "Is it? Because I think this board deserves to know the truth. Victoria humiliated the Langford family, destroyed a critical financing deal, and married a stranger to cover her tracks. And now she expects us to pretend everything's fine. I expect you to do your job, Victoria said coldly, which is overseeing this company's financial health, not policing my personal life. Your personal life became our business the moment you used it to secure bank approval. I secured bank approval by providing what they asked for: stable partnership, financial backing, a long-term restoration plan. Victoria stood. Everything I've done has been in the best interest of this company. Can you say the same? Damien's expression darkened. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know you've been meeting with property developers. I know you've been shopping the estate land to private buyers. And I know you're waiting for me to fail so you can liquidate assets and walk away with a fortune. The room erupted. Board members started talking over each other. Eleanor banged her hand on the table. Damien shot to his feet, face flushed with rage. That's a lie. It's documented. Victoria pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. 3 meetings in the last 6 weeks, all with developers interested in subdividing the estate. Want to explain that to the board, Damien? Or should I? Silence dropped like a guillotine. Eleanor opened the folder, scanned the contents. Her expression went from neutral to glacial. Damien, is this true? He didn't answer. Answer the question. I was exploring options, he said through gritted teeth, in case Victoria's leadership continued to fail. Without board approval? Without disclosure? I was protecting my interests. Your interests are tied to this company, which means your actions constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. Eleanor closed the folder. You're suspended from all board activities pending a formal investigation, effective immediately. Damien's face went white, then red. You can't. I can, and I am. Leave. Now. For a moment, Ethan thought Damien might actually lunge across the table. His hands were clenched into fists, his whole body vibrating with fury. Then he turned and walked out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the paintings. Eleanor looked at Victoria. That was quite a performance. It wasn't a performance. It was the truth. Perhaps, but it doesn't change the fact that this board needs assurance about your marriage, about your stability, about your ability to lead this company through the next 6 months. Victoria sat back down. Her hand found Ethan's again. I can give you that assurance, she said quietly. But I need time. The gala is in 6 weeks. If I can pull that off, if I can show investors that the flagship property is viable, the company stabilizes, the stock rebounds, everyone wins. And if you can't, then I'll step down. Voluntarily. The room went silent again. Ethan stared at her. She hadn't mentioned this, hadn't warned him she was about to bet her entire position on a single event. Eleanor studied Victoria for a long moment. 6 weeks, she said finally. You have until the gala. If it succeeds, you keep your position, and this board backs your leadership. If it fails, you resign, and we appoint interim management. Agreed. And Mr. Cole? Ethan met Eleanor's eyes. Take care of her, because if this falls apart, you'll both pay the price. Yes, ma'am. Eleanor nodded. Meeting adjourned. The board members filed out in silence. Within minutes, the room was empty except for Victoria and Ethan. She was still holding his hand. That was insane, Ethan said. That was necessary. You just bet your entire career on a Christmas party. I bet it on us. She looked at him. Can you finish the restoration in 6 weeks? Ethan thought about the ballroom floor, the water-damaged ceiling, the electrical systems that belonged in a museum, the sheer volume of work that needed to happen. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe. If I don't sleep and nothing else goes wrong. Then we don't sleep, and we make sure nothing goes wrong. She stood, gathering her things, moving like nothing had just happened, like she hadn't just destroyed her stepbrother in front of the entire board and wagered her future on 6 weeks of miracles. Ethan caught her wrist. Hey, you okay? Victoria stopped, looked at his hand on her wrist, then at his face. No, she said quietly, but I will be. It was the same thing she'd said the night he picked her up in the rain, like a mantra, like if she said it enough times it might become true. Ethan let go. They walked out together. The next 3 weeks blurred into a nightmare of 16-hour days and borrowed money. Ethan worked until his hands bled. Literally. He tore out rotted wood, rewired chandeliers, replastered water-damaged walls, and taught himself ornamental carpentry from YouTube videos at 2 in the morning. He maxed out his credit cards buying materials the company couldn't afford. He called in every favor he'd ever earned, and Victoria worked beside him. Not in the office, not on phone calls. Actually beside him, in work boots and coveralls, hauling debris and holding flashlights and learning how to use a circular saw without cutting off her fingers. "You're doing it wrong," Ethan said, watching her measure a piece of trim. "I'm doing it exactly how you showed me." "Yeah, and I showed you wrong. Here." He moved behind her, guiding her hands. "See? Measure twice, cut once." Victoria went very still. Ethan realized how close he was standing, close enough to smell her shampoo, close enough to feel her breathing. He stepped back. "Sorry, It's fine." Her voice was tight. "Show me again." He did, carefully, professionally. But something had shifted. They started eating dinner together, not at opposite ends of the table anymore, just sitting at the kitchen island with takeout containers between them, too tired to maintain distance. "Tell me about your daughter," Victoria said one night. Ethan looked up from his fried rice. "What do you want to know?" "Anything. Everything. You never talk about her." "That's because I'm a terrible father who hasn't seen her in 3 weeks. You're not a terrible father. You're working to build something. I'm working to save your company. That's different." Victoria set down her chopsticks. "Do you regret it? Marrying me?" "No." "You didn't even think about it." "Because I don't need to. I made a choice. I'm sticking with it." He pushed rice around his container. "Emma, my daughter, she's 7, loves dinosaurs, wants to be a paleontologist when she grows up. Currently living with my ex-wife's parents because I couldn't afford childcare and work full-time." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. They're good people. Better than I deserve." He looked at her. "When this is over, I'm going to take a week off. Drive to Pennsylvania, spend actual time with her. Be a real parent for once. When this is over, you can take a month off. I'll pay you for it." "I don't want your money, Victoria." "Then what do you want?" The question caught him off guard. Ethan thought about it, really thought about it. "I want you to stop carrying everything alone," he said finally. "I want you to trust that I'm not going to bail. The second things get hard, and I want you to eat an actual meal instead of just coffee and takeout because you're going to make yourself sick." Victoria stared at him. Then she laughed. It was the first real laugh he'd heard from her. Not polite, not controlled, just genuine, surprised laughter that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "What?" Ethan said. "You sound like a husband. I am your husband. You know what I mean?" Yeah, he did. The moment stretched too long. Got too heavy. Victoria cleared her throat and stood. "I should get some sleep. Early morning tomorrow." "Yeah, me too." But neither of them moved. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly, "for caring, even when you don't have to." "I do have to. That's what people do when they—" He stopped. "When they what?" Ethan shook his head. "Good night, Victoria." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good night." She disappeared upstairs. Ethan sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the takeout containers, and tried to ignore the fact that he'd almost said something catastrophically stupid, something like, "when they love someone." Because he didn't. He couldn't. This was temporary. A business arrangement. A favor for someone who needed help. Except it didn't feel temporary anymore. And that terrified him. 2 days before the gala, everything fell apart. Ethan was on a ladder in the ballroom installing the last chandelier when his phone rang. Unknown number. "This is Ethan." "Mr. Cole, this is Patricia Reeves from Consolidated Insurance Group. I'm calling regarding the liability policy for the Sinclair Grand Hotel." His stomach dropped. "What about it?" "We've received information suggesting structural work has been completed without proper inspection and permitting. Per the terms of your policy, we're required to conduct an emergency review before we can approve coverage for your upcoming event." "What information? From who?" "I'm not at liberty to say. But without verification that all work meets code, we'll have to suspend coverage effective immediately." "You can't do that. The gala's in 2 days." "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole. Our hands are tied. Unless you can provide certified inspection reports by 5 p.m. tomorrow, the policy is void. The line went dead. Ethan stood there on the ladder, phone in hand, watching his entire world collapse. Getting a certified inspection took weeks. Getting one in 24 hours was impossible. And without insurance, the gala couldn't happen. Without the gala, Victoria lost everything. He climbed down and found her in the office, reviewing seating charts. "We have a problem." She looked up, saw his face. "How bad?" "Insurance is pulling coverage unless we get a certified inspection by tomorrow at 5. All the color drained from her face. "That's impossible." "I know." "Who reported us?" "They wouldn't say, but I'm guessing it rhymes with Damien." Victoria stood, pacing, her mind visibly racing through options. "We could postpone. Investors are already flying in. Postponing looks like failure. We could get a different insurer." "Not in 24 hours. "Then what?" Ethan pulled out his phone, started scrolling through contacts. "What are you doing?" "Calling the one person who might be able to help." He found the number, dialed. It rang 4 times. Then a gruff voice answered. "Cole, haven't heard from you in 2 years. What do you want?" "I need an inspector, tomorrow morning, emergency basis." "You're out of your mind." "I'll pay triple rate." "You couldn't afford my regular rate." "What's this about?" Ethan explained, fast and desperate. The line went quiet. "This the hotel heiress you married?" "Yeah." "You're in deep, kid." "I know. Can you help or not?" Another pause. "I'll be there at 8 a.m. But Cole? If the work's not up to code, I can't pass it. I don't care how pretty your wife is." "It's up to code. I made sure of it." "We'll see." He hung up. Victoria was staring at him. "Who was that?" "Frank Morrison, best structural inspector in the state. Also the most expensive." "How much?" "More than I have, but I'll figure it out." "Ethan, I said I'll figure it out." She crossed the room, stood in front of him close enough that he had to look down to meet her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "We already had this conversation." "No, I mean right now. Why are you bankrupting yourself for a gala you don't even care about?" "Because I care about you," Ethan thought. But he didn't say it. Instead he said, "Because we're in this together. Remember?" Victoria's eyes were searching his face, looking for something he wasn't ready to give her. Then she kissed him. It wasn't like the courthouse kiss. Wasn't careful or brief or performative. It was real. Her hands were in his hair, his were on her waist. And for 10 seconds, the gala and Damien and the insurance company didn't exist. Then she pulled back, breathing hard. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize. This complicates things." "Things were already complicated." Victoria laughed, shaky and breathless. "What are we doing, Ethan?" "I have no idea." They stood there in the middle of the office, inches apart, trying to figure out how a fake marriage had turned into something terrifyingly real. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. He looked at it. "Marcus. I should take this." Victoria nodded and stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. Ethan answered. "Yeah? You alone?" "No." "Why?" "Because I just got a very interesting call from Victoria Sinclair's lawyer, asking questions about your marriage, how long I've known you, whether I thought the relationship was legitimate." Marcus paused. "He's building a case, man, and he's coming for both of you." Ethan looked at Victoria. "I know," he said quietly, "but let him come. We're ready." He hoped that was true. Frank Morrison showed up at 7:45 the next morning, driving a pickup truck older than Ethan and carrying a clipboard that looked like it had survived 3 wars. "You look like hell," Frank said by way of greeting. Ethan had been up all night doing final touches on the ballroom. His eyes felt like sandpaper, his hands were cramping, and he was pretty sure he'd consumed enough coffee to kill a smaller man. "Good to see you too, Frank." The older man grunted and looked up at the hotel. "This the place?" "Yeah." "Big job." "You have no idea." Frank pulled a pair of safety glasses from his pocket. "Show me what you got, kid, and don't waste my time with excuses if something's wrong. I call it like I see it." They spent the next 6 hours going through every inch of work Ethan had completed. Frank checked load-bearing beams, tested electrical connections, measured floor supports, and inspected plaster repairs with the intensity of a man hunting for buried treasure. He didn't speak much, just made notes on his clipboard and occasionally grunted. Victoria appeared around noon with sandwiches neither of them ate. "How's it looking?" she asked quietly. Frank glanced at her. "You the wife?" "I am. You know your husband's certifiably insane, right? The amount of work he did here in 3 weeks? Most contractors wouldn't attempt this in 6 months. Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." Frank went back to his clipboard. "Give me another hour. I'll have my report." Victoria caught Ethan's eye. He couldn't read her expression. They waited in the office, not talking, just sitting in chairs across from each other while the clock on the wall ticked closer to 5 p.m. At 4:15, Frank walked in. He dropped the clipboard on the desk between them. "Well," Ethan said, "you passed. Barely. Your electrical work is sloppy and you cut a few corners on the ornamental trim, but structurally, it's sound. Better than sound. I don't know how you pulled it off, but this building's safer now than it's been in 20 years. The relief hit Ethan so hard he actually had to close his eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank whatever higher power kept you from killing yourself on that scaffolding." Frank pulled out a signed certificate. "This is good for 90 days. After that, you'll need a full recertification. And Cole?" "Yeah?" "You ever need work, call me. I could use a guy who's too stubborn to know when to quit." He left. Victoria was staring at the certificate like it might disappear if she looked away. "We did it," she whispered. "You sound surprised." "I am. I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought this was going to be the thing that broke us." Ethan stood and called the insurance company. Put it on speaker. Patricia Reeves answered on the second ring. "Ms. Reeves, this is Ethan Cole. I'm emailing you the certified inspection report right now, signed and dated. Everything's up to code." Silence on the other end. "Ms. Reeves, I see it. Give me a moment to review." They waited. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, "Everything appears to be in order. Coverage is reinstated, effective immediately." Ethan met Victoria's eyes. She was smiling, actually smiling. "Thank you," he said and hung up. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Victoria crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't romantic, wasn't calculated, just pure exhausted relief. Ethan held her and felt something in his chest crack open. "We should celebrate," Victoria said against his shoulder. "We should sleep. Sleep is for after the gala." She pulled back, looked up at him. "Take me to dinner, somewhere in town, somewhere people can see us." "Why?" "Because Damien's telling everyone our marriage is fake, and I want the whole town to see that it's not." Ethan studied her face. "Is it? Not fake?" Victoria's expression shifted, became something softer and more dangerous. "I don't know what it is anymore," she admitted, "but I know I don't want to hide." So they didn't. Ethan changed into clean clothes. Not the expensive suit, just jeans and a button-down that Victoria said made him look like a real person instead of a corporate prop. Victoria wore a simple blue dress that probably cost more than his truck, but looked effortless. They drove into town in her car, and when they walked into Grayson's, the nicest restaurant Greystone had to offer, every single conversation stopped. The hostess recognized Victoria immediately. "Ms. Sinclair, we weren't expecting you. Last-minute decision? Table for two?" "Of course, right this way." They were seated by the window, prime real estate, maximum visibility. Ethan could feel eyes on them from every direction. "Everyone's staring," he muttered. "Good. Let them stare." Victoria picked up the menu. "What do you want?" "To not be the town gossip for the next 6 months." "Too late for that." She smiled. "The pot roast is excellent here." They ordered. The waiter was professionally polite, but Ethan caught him glancing at Victoria's left hand, checking for a ring she wasn't wearing. When the food came, they ate in silence for a while. But it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of the first few weeks. It was something easier, almost comfortable. "Tell me something," Victoria said eventually. "Like what?" "Something real. Something you've never told anyone." Ethan set down his fork. "Why?" "Because we've been married for a month and I barely know you. And if we're going to convince people this is real, I should probably know more than your coffee order and your daughter's name." Fair point. Ethan thought about it, then decided to trust her. "My ex-wife left because I couldn't give her the life she wanted. Nice house, steady income, security. I was working construction, taking night classes, trying to build something, but it wasn't fast enough, so she found someone who already had everything built. He paused. I don't blame her, but I blame myself for not being enough. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. You're enough, Ethan. You're more than enough. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because you walked into my disaster of a life and didn't run. Most people would have, but you stayed. That's not nothing. Ethan looked at her across the table. This woman who'd been carrying an empire on her shoulders since she was too young to know better, and realized she understood in a way most people couldn't. They'd both spent their lives trying to be enough for people who would never be satisfied. Your turn, he said. Tell me something real. Victoria took a sip of wine. I haven't been happy in 7 years. Not since my father died. Every day feels like performance. Like I'm playing the role of Victoria Sinclair, CEO, instead of actually being her. And I'm so tired of pretending I have all the answers when I barely understand the questions. You're doing better than you think. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm one disaster away from losing everything. You didn't lose it today. Today's not over. As if summoned by the comment, the restaurant door opened and Damien walked in. He wasn't alone. Richard Langford was with him, the banker Victoria had left at the altar, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than some cars. They spotted Victoria immediately. You've got to be kidding me, Ethan muttered. Don't react. Just keep eating. But Damien was already crossing the restaurant toward their table, Langford following like a well-dressed shadow. Victoria! What a surprise! Damien's smile was poisonous. And Ethan, still playing house, I see. Damien, Richard! Victoria's voice was ice. I'd say it's good to see you, but we both know that would be a lie. Langford looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else, but was too polite to leave. I wanted to apologize, he said stiffly, for the wedding. I should have realized you were under duress. I wasn't under duress. I made a choice. To humiliate me in front of my colleagues and family? To not marry someone I didn't love? Langford flinched. Damien's smile widened. Love. Right. How could I forget? Damien looked at Ethan. Tell me, Mr. Cole, how does it feel to be a charity case, living in her house, spending her money, playing the devoted husband while she pulls your strings? Ethan stood. He didn't plan it, didn't think about it, just stood up and faced Damien with the kind of calm that came from being too exhausted to care about consequences. I don't live off her money. I work 16-hour days fixing a building you tried to sell out from under her. I sleep on a couch that costs more than I make in a month because that's what she needed me to do. And I'm not playing anything. He stepped closer. But you? You're playing a game you already lost. She beat you at the board meeting. She beat you with the insurance company. And she's going to beat you at the gala. So here's my advice. Walk away before you embarrass yourself even more. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Damien's face was red. His hands were clenched. For a second, Ethan thought he might actually throw a punch. Then Langford put a hand on Damien's shoulder. Let's go. This isn't worth it. Damien shrugged him off but stepped back. Enjoy your dinner, he said through clenched teeth. While you still can. They left. Ethan sat back down. His hands were shaking. Victoria was staring at him. What? He said. You just defended me in front of the entire town. Yeah, so? So no one's ever done that before. Ethan picked up his fork. Well, I did. Can we eat now? But Victoria reached across the table and took his hand. Thank you. You already said that. I'm saying it again. They finished dinner holding hands across the table while the whole restaurant pretended not to watch. And when they walked out into the parking lot, Victoria didn't let go. Take me home, she said quietly. You are home. We're in your car. No, I mean, she stopped, looked up at him. I mean, take me home the way a husband would. Ethan's heart stopped. Victoria, I know what this is, what it started as, but it doesn't feel like that anymore, does it? No. Then stop treating me like I'm fragile. Stop sleeping on the couch. Stop pretending you don't feel this too. She was right. He did feel it. Had been feeling it for weeks, maybe longer. But saying it out loud made it real, made it dangerous. If we do this, Ethan said carefully, there's no going back. This stops being a business arrangement. It becomes actual marriage. with all the mess that comes with it. I know. And when it falls apart, what makes you so sure it will? Because everything I touch eventually does. Victoria stepped closer, close enough that he could count her heartbeats through the fabric of her dress. Then I guess we'll fall apart together. She kissed him. Not like in the office, not uncertain or apologetic. This kiss was deliberate, permanent. And when they finally pulled apart, standing in the parking lot under the streetlights with the whole town probably watching from inside the restaurant, Ethan knew they'd just crossed a line they couldn't uncross. "Let's go home," he said. They drove back in silence, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of things they weren't ready to say. When they got to the estate, Victoria led him upstairs without a word, and when she opened her bedroom door, Ethan didn't hesitate. He followed her inside. The next morning, Ethan woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows and Victoria's arm across his chest. For a moment, he just lay there, trying to figure out if he'd made the best or worst decision of his life. Then Victoria stirred. "What time is it?" she mumbled. "Early? 7, maybe?" She groaned and buried her face in his shoulder. "The gala's tonight. I should get up." "Probably." Neither of them moved. Finally, Victoria lifted her head and looked at him. Her hair was a mess, she had pillow creases on her face, and she looked more real than he'd ever seen her. "So," she said, "we did that." "Yeah." "Any regrets?" Ethan thought about it. Honest. "Ask me again in 6 months." She laughed and hit him with a pillow. They spent the morning pretending everything was normal. Victoria made coffee. Ethan burned toast. They argued about whether the ballroom lighting needed adjusting. It felt domestic in a way that should have been terrifying, but somehow wasn't. Around noon, the event coordinator showed up with a team of decorators, and the estate transformed into controlled chaos. People everywhere. Flowers being arranged, tables being set, a small army of workers turning the old hotel into something that might actually impress investors. Ethan stayed out of the way, doing final checks on the structural elements and making sure nothing was going to collapse under the weight of 200 guests. Marcus showed up around 3. "You look different," he said. "I'm wearing the same thing I always wear." "That's not what I mean." Marcus studied him. "You slept with her." Ethan didn't answer. "Man, you really did. You actually fell for the billionaire." "Drop it, Marcus." "Can't drop it. It's written all over your face. You're in love with her." Ethan turned. "So what if I am?" Marcus held up his hands. "Hey, no judgment. Just making sure you know what you're doing, because this gala, this is where it all comes together or falls apart. And if you're emotionally involved, I've been emotionally involved since the night I picked her up in that wedding dress. I just stopped pretending otherwise." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "All right then. What do you need me to do?" "Make sure the sound system doesn't fail and keep an eye out for Damien. He's going to try something. I know it." "You think he'd sabotage his own family's event?" "I think he'd burn it down if it meant getting what he wants." Marcus nodded grimly. "I'll watch the exits." By 6 p.m., the guests started arriving. Ethan cleaned up and put on the suit again. When he came downstairs, Victoria was waiting in the foyer wearing a black gown that made her look like she'd stepped out of an old movie. "You clean up nice," she said. "You clean up better." She smiled and took his arm. "Ready?" "Not even a little." "Good. Me neither." They walked into the ballroom together. The transformation was stunning. The space Ethan had spent weeks repairing now glowed with candlelight and crystal. The chandeliers he'd installed sparkled overhead. The floor he'd rebuilt held firm under the weight of elegant guests who had no idea how close this place had come to collapse. Investors mingled with board members. Local business owners talked to hotel executives. And in the corner, watching everything with cold calculation, stood Damien. He caught Ethan's eye and smiled. Ethan's stomach tightened. Something was wrong. He could feel it. Victoria spent the first hour working the room like a professional, shaking hands, making small talk, convincing people the company was stable and worth investing in. Ethan stayed close, playing the role of supportive husband while watching for whatever disaster Damien had planned. Around 8, Eleanor Vance pulled Victoria aside. "Impressive work, Victoria. I'll admit I had doubts." "Thank you, Eleanor." "Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. You still need to prove you can maintain this momentum." "I will." Eleanor glanced at Ethan. "And your husband?" He's been quite the asset. He has. Make sure you keep him. Good men are rare in this business. She walked away. Victoria turned to Ethan. See? We're winning. We're not done yet. As if on cue, the lights flickered, then went out completely. The ballroom plunged into darkness. Guests gasped. Someone screamed. Ethan grabbed Victoria's hand. Stay close. Emergency lighting kicked in after 10 seconds, bathing everything in dim red. And that's when Ethan saw it. Water. Pouring from the ceiling in the far corner of the ballroom. No, he breathed. He ran. The water was coming from the floor above, from a pipe that shouldn't have been anywhere near that location. Ethan pushed through confused guests and found the source. Someone had deliberately cracked a water main, and it was flooding directly into the ballroom's newly repaired structure. Shut off the main valve, he shouted to Marcus. Where? Basement, northwest corner. Marcus took off. Ethan grabbed tablecloths and started trying to divert the water away from the electrical panels. If it hit the wrong junction, the whole building could go up in flames. Victoria appeared beside him. What can I do? Get everyone out, calmly. Tell them it's a minor plumbing issue. Ethan, now Victoria. She nodded and started herding guests toward the exits, her voice calm and authoritative, even as water pooled across the floor she'd fought so hard to save. Within 5 minutes, the ballroom was empty except for Ethan, Marcus, and a maintenance worker trying to contain the flood. The water stopped. Marcus had found the valve, but the damage was done. The floor was soaked, the ceiling was dripping, and in the center of the room, standing in a puddle with his expensive shoes ruined, was Damien. He was smiling. Shame about the plumbing, he said. Old buildings. You never know when something's going to fail. Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Damien by the collar. You did this! I don't know what you're talking about. You sabotaged your own family's event. You could have killed someone. It's just water, Cole. Relax. Ethan's fist connected with Damien's jaw before he could think about it. Damien went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip. Ethan! Victoria was in the doorway, staring in horror. Damien laughed from the floor. You just assaulted me in front of witnesses. That's criminal. So is sabotage. Prove it. Ethan looked at Marcus. Marcus held up his phone. Already called the fire inspector, and I got footage of you coming out of the mechanical room 20 minutes before the pipe burst. Time-stamped. Saved to the cloud. Damien's smile vanished. You're done, Victoria said quietly. Security will escort you out. And tomorrow, the board will vote to remove you permanently. Not just suspended, gone. Damien stood, wiping blood from his mouth. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Ethan said. You lost. Accept it. Security arrived and led Damien out. He didn't resist, just walked away like he'd already moved on to his next scheme. When they were alone, Victoria looked at the flooded ballroom. It's ruined. No, it's not. It's wet. That's different. Ethan squeezed her shoulder. We can fix this. The investors just walked out thinking we can't even keep the plumbing working. How do we come back from that? By inviting them back tomorrow for a private breakfast and showing them that when something breaks, we fix it immediately instead of hiding from it. Victoria stared at him. You think that'll work? I think we don't have a choice. She nodded slowly, then leaned against him, exhausted. I'm so tired, Ethan. I know. I don't know how much more I can take. You don't have to take it alone anymore, remember? She looked up at him, and despite everything, despite the flood and the sabotage and Damien's endless attacks, she smiled. Yeah, I remember. They spent the rest of the night cleaning. By 3 a.m., the ballroom was drying and the damaged ceiling section was repaired. By 6, Ethan had contacted every investor who'd attended and personally invited them to breakfast. 12 showed up. Victoria stood in front of them in the dining room, still wearing yesterday's gown, and told them the truth. Last night was sabotage. My stepbrother tried to destroy this event because he wants to destroy this company. But here's what he doesn't understand. This company is built on resilience. When something breaks, we fix it. When someone attacks us, we get stronger. And when people bet against us, we prove them wrong. She gestured to Ethan. This is my husband. Some of you know him as the contractor. Others know him as the guy who punched Victoria Sinclair in front of 200 people. A few investors chuckled. But what you should know is that he saved this building, not because I paid him, not because he had to, but because he believed it was worth saving. And if he can believe that about a 100-year-old hotel, maybe you can believe it about this company. Silence. Then one of the investors, an older man Ethan didn't recognize, started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, the whole room was applauding. Eleanor Vance stood. Victoria, on behalf of the board, I'm pleased to inform you that we're approving the full refinancing package, effective immediately. Victoria's knees actually buckled. Ethan caught her. We did it, she whispered. You did it. No, we did. And standing there in front of 12 investors who'd just bet millions on a company held together by spite and stubbornness, Ethan realized she was right. They'd actually won. The investors left by 9 and the dining room went quiet, except for the sound of Victoria's breathing. She was still standing where she'd given the speech, hands gripping the back of a chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her makeup was smudged, the gown had water stains at the hem, and she looked like she might collapse at any second. Sit down, Ethan said. I'm fine. Victoria? I said, I'm fine. But her voice cracked on the last word. Ethan crossed the room and gently pried her fingers off the chair. Come on, you need to sleep. I need to call the bank and the attorneys, and what you need is to stop for 5 minutes and let yourself breathe. She looked up at him with eyes that were too bright, too sharp, too close to breaking. If I stop, I'll fall apart. Then fall apart. I'll catch you. That did it. Victoria's face crumpled and she started crying, not delicate tears, full, ugly sobbing that shook her whole body. Ethan pulled her against his chest and held her while she fell apart in the middle of the dining room where she had just convinced 12 strangers to bet millions on her company. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm sorry, Don't apologize. You earned this breakdown about 6 weeks ago. She laughed through the tears. I'm a mess. You're human. There's a difference. They stood there for a long time. Eventually the crying stopped and Victoria pulled back, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I ruined your suit. It's your suit. You bought it. Still. She took a shaky breath. Thank you for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I don't think you understand how much I understand. Ethan brushed a strand of hair out of her face. Now go take a shower, change into something that doesn't smell like chlorinated water, and then we're both sleeping for 12 hours. We can't sleep for 12 hours. There's too much. Victoria, the company's saved. The bank approved the refinancing. Damien's gone. You won. Let yourself have this. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. 12 hours. Maybe 10. I'm not unrealistic. This time when she smiled, it was real. They made it 8 hours before Victoria's phone started ringing. Ethan groaned and buried his face in the pillow. Next to him, Victoria reached blindly for the nightstand and grabbed her phone. This better be important, she mumbled. Ethan couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he watched Victoria's expression shift from sleepy to alert in about 3 seconds. When? A pause. How much? Another pause. I'll be there in an hour. She hung up. That was the bank. Richard Langford just filed a formal complaint claiming our marriage constitutes fraud. He's demanding the refinancing be suspended pending investigation. Ethan sat up. He can't do that. The board already approved it. He can do whatever he wants. He's got $50 million invested in this deal, and apparently he's decided to make my life hell. Victoria was already out of bed, pulling clothes from the closet. His lawyers are arguing that I manipulated the bank by entering into a sham marriage specifically to meet their partnership requirements. It's not a sham marriage. Try proving that to a room full of attorneys. She yanked on a pair of pants. They're going to want documentation, evidence, proof that our relationship existed before the refinancing requirements were announced, which we don't have because it didn't. Victoria stopped, turned. Exactly. Ethan ran his hands through his hair. So what do? We fight. Again. She grabbed a blouse. There's a hearing this afternoon, emergency session. If we can convince the bank's legal team that the marriage is legitimate, they'll proceed. If not, they pull everything and Damien wins by default. How do we convince them? I have no idea, but we've got 4 hours to figure it out. They drove to the bank in silence, both of them running through scenarios that didn't end in disaster. Ethan's mind kept circling back to the same problem. How do you prove something is real when it started as a lie? The hearing was in a conference room that felt more like an interrogation chamber. Long table, harsh lighting. 4 attorneys representing the bank, 2 representing Langford, and 1 very tired-looking mediator who clearly wished he was anywhere else. Victoria and Ethan sat on one side. Everyone else sat on the other. The mediator checked his watch. "Let's begin. Mr. Langford has filed a complaint alleging that Miss Sinclair entered into a fraudulent marriage for the purpose of securing bank approval for commercial refinancing. Ms. Sinclair, you have the floor." Victoria stood. She'd changed into a navy suit that made her look like she was about to argue a case in front of the Supreme Court. "The allegation is baseless. My marriage to Ethan Cole is legal, legitimate, and unrelated to the bank's partnership requirements." One of Langford's attorneys, a woman in her 50s with the kind of face that suggested she ate opposing counsel for breakfast, leaned forward. "Can you provide evidence of your relationship prior to August 15th, the date the bank notified you of the partnership requirement?" "We met in July, through a consultation regarding structural repairs at the Sinclair Grand Hotel." "Do you have communication records from July? Work emails, invoicing, project documentation? Do you have personal communication? Text messages, photos, anything indicating a romantic relationship?" Victoria hesitated. "No." "So the first documented personal interaction between you and Mr. Cole was your marriage certificate, dated September 3rd, 3 weeks after the bank's notification." "That's correct." The attorney smiled. "Then I submit that this marriage is precisely what it appears to be, a calculated business maneuver disguised as romance." "That's not true," Ethan said. Everyone turned to look at him. The mediator adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Cole, you're not required to testify." "I know, but I'm going to anyway." He stood. "You want proof our marriage is real? Fine. Here's your proof. I've spent the last 2 months sleeping on a couch in a house I don't own, fixing a building I don't have any stake in, and fighting battles that aren't mine to fight. I've maxed out 3 credit cards. I haven't seen my daughter in 6 weeks, and I punched a guy in front of 200 people for insulting my wife." He looked at Victoria. "You think I do all that for a business arrangement?" Langford's attorney wasn't impressed. "Passionate speech, Mr. Cole, but passion isn't evidence. For all we know, Ms. Sinclair is compensating you handsomely for your performance. She's not paying me anything. Can you prove that?" "Check my bank records. I've been paying for everything myself." "Then you're either lying or you're a fool." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Maybe I'm both, but I'm not a fraud." The mediator held up his hand. "Let's keep this civil. Miss Sinclair, do you have anything else to add?" Victoria looked at Ethan, then at the attorneys, then at the mediator. "No," she said quietly. "I don't have proof. Not the kind you're looking for. I can't show you text messages from July because we weren't texting in July. I can't show you photos because we weren't taking photos. And I can't prove my marriage is real because the only evidence I have is standing right next to me." She took Ethan's hand. "But here's what I can tell you. Ethan Cole married me when I had nothing to offer him except debt and disaster. He showed up in a storm because I asked him to. He defended me when no one else would. And he's still here even though walking away would have been easier 100 times over. So if you want to call that fraud, go ahead. But I call it the most real thing that's ever happened to me." The room went silent. Langford's attorney opened her mouth to respond, but the mediator cut her off. "I think we've heard enough. I'll review the case and issue a recommendation within 48 hours. He closed his folder. "You're dismissed." They walked out into the parking lot without speaking. Ethan's hands were shaking. Victoria's face was unreadable. "That was either brilliant or the worst thing we could have done," she said finally. "Probably both." She laughed, sharp and tired. "Story of our lives." They got in the car. Ethan started the engine but didn't put it in drive. "Victoria, if they rule against us, they won't. But if they do, then we figure it out, like we always do." She looked at him. "I'm not giving up. Not on the company. Not on this." "Not on us?" Victoria's expression softened. "Especially not on us." Ethan wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that love and stubbornness could win against lawyers and corporate politics. But he'd been around long enough to know the world didn't work that way. They drove back to the estate in silence. When they pulled up, there was a car in the driveway Ethan didn't recognize. Expensive, black, the kind of vehicle that suggested whoever owned it had more money than sense. "Who's that?" he asked. Victoria's face went pale. "My mother." "I thought you said your mother lived in Europe." "She does, which means she flew 6,000 miles to yell at me in person." They got out of the car just as the front door opened and a woman in her early 60s stepped out. She was tall, elegant, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Ethan's annual salary, and the look she gave Victoria could have frozen lava. "Mother," Victoria said carefully, "what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here? I'm trying to understand why my daughter married a contractor she barely knows and didn't bother to inform her own family." "I informed the family. I sent an email." "An email? How thoughtful." The woman's eyes slid to Ethan. "And you must be the husband." Ethan extended his hand. "Ethan Cole." She looked at his hand like it might be contagious. Then, after a long pause, shook it with the enthusiasm of someone touching a dead fish. "Catherine Sinclair. I'd say it's a pleasure, but I make it a policy not to lie." "Mother, inside, both of you. We're going to discuss this like civilized people instead of standing in the driveway like common help." She swept back into the house. Victoria looked at Ethan. "I'm sorry in advance for whatever's about to happen." "It's fine. I've dealt with worse." "You really haven't." Catherine was waiting in the sitting room, perched on an antique chair like she owned the place, which Ethan supposed she technically did, or had at some point. "Sit," she commanded. They sat. Catherine studied them both with the intensity of a jeweler examining a fake diamond. "Let me be clear," she said. "I don't care who you marry, Victoria. You're an adult, but this?" She gestured vaguely at both of them. "This reeks of desperation, and when a Sinclair acts desperate, people notice." "I'm not desperate. I'm strategic." "You married a man you barely know 3 weeks after abandoning your engagement to one of the most powerful financiers on the East Coast. That's not strategy. That's panic. Richard Langford is a manipulative. Richard Langford was your safety net, and you cut it loose for a contractor with no assets, no connections, and apparently no survival instincts." Catherine's eyes cut to Ethan. "No offense." "None taken," Ethan said flatly. "Mother, Ethan has been what? Helpful? Supportive? I'm sure he has. But helpful and supportive don't save companies. Money saves companies. Power saves companies. And you just alienated the one man who could have provided both." Victoria stood. "I didn't want Richard's money. I wanted to run my company on my own terms. And how's that working out? From what I hear, you nearly lost everything to Damien. The only reason you're still standing is because your contractor husband punched your stepbrother in front of investors. He was defending me. He was committing assault in front of witnesses. Do you have any idea how that looks?" "It looks like someone finally stood up for me." Catherine's expression didn't change. "It looks like you're out of control. And now Richard Langford is challenging your marriage in court, which means even if you survive this, your reputation is permanently damaged." Ethan had heard enough. "With respect, Mrs. Sinclair, Victoria's reputation is fine. What's damaged is the way people in your world think marriage is a business transaction instead of a partnership." Catherine turned her full attention on him. "And what would you know about my world, Mr. Cole?" "Not much, but I know your daughter works harder than anyone I've ever met. I know she saved a 100-year-old building from collapse while fighting off a stepbrother who tried to steal her inheritance. And I know she did it without asking for help from you or anyone else. Because she's too stubborn to admit when she's failing." "She's not failing. She's winning. You just don't like how she's doing it." The room went silent. Catherine stood slowly. "I came here to talk sense into my daughter, not to be lectured by someone who married into this family 5 minutes ago." "Then maybe you should have shown up before the wedding, or after the gala, or literally any time in the last 6 months when Victoria was drowning and could have used her mother's support instead of criticism." Victoria grabbed his arm. "Ethan!" "No, I'm done pretending this is okay." He looked at Catherine. "You want to know why Victoria married me? Because I showed up. That's it. I answered the phone. I drove into a storm. I stayed when everyone else walked away. And if that's not good enough for you, then honestly, I don't care." Catherine stared at him. Then, to Ethan's complete shock, she smiled. "You've got spine, I'll give you that." She picked up her purse. "Victoria, I'm staying at the Greystone Inn for the next 3 days. If you'd like to have dinner and discuss this like adults, call me. If not, I'll see you at Christmas." She walked out. The front door closed. Victoria was staring at Ethan like he'd just grown a second head. "Did you just yell at my mother?" "Little bit. No one yells at my mother." "Well, I did. And honestly, it felt pretty good." Victoria started laughing. Real, uncontrolled laughter that made her double over. "You're insane." "Probably." She crossed the room and kissed him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing up, like you said." Ethan wrapped his arms around her. "That's what husbands do." "Real husbands?" "Yeah, real ones." They stood there in the sitting room, holding each other while the dust settled on yet another battle in a war that never seemed to end. 2 days later, the mediator's recommendation came through. Ethan was in the ballroom replacing water-damaged floorboards when Victoria found him. She was holding a printed document, and her expression was unreadable. "Well," he said, "he ruled in our favor. Says Langford's claim lacks sufficient evidence and that our marriage appears to be legitimate based on testimony and circumstantial evidence." Relief hit Ethan so hard he had to sit down. "We won?" "We won." "So the refinancing goes through?" "The refinancing goes through. The bank's releasing the funds next week." Victoria sat next to him on the floor. "It's over. We actually survived this." Ethan looked at her. "What about Damien?" "The board voted to remove him permanently. He's challenging it, but Eleanor says he doesn't have a case, especially after Marcus's footage showed him sabotaging the plumbing." "And Langford?" "Angry, embarrassed, but legally he can't do anything else. The mediator's ruling is binding." She leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. "It's really over." They sat there in the half-repaired ballroom, surrounded by tools and sawdust and the evidence of 2 months of impossible work. "So what now?" Ethan asked. "Now we run a company. Together." "I'm a contractor, Victoria. I don't know anything about running hotels." "You know about fixing things that are broken. That's half the job." She lifted her head and looked at him. "I want you as a partner, officially, not just as my husband, as co-owner of the restoration division." Ethan stared. "You're serious?" "Completely. You saved this building. You should have equity in it." "Victoria." "I already talked to the attorneys. If you agree, we can file the paperwork next week. 50-50 split on all restoration projects. Full partnership. That's worth millions." "I know. You're giving me millions of dollars." "I'm giving you what you earned." She took his hand. "You risked everything for me. Let me give you something back." Ethan's mind was reeling. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He was supposed to help her, then fade back into his normal life, not become a millionaire co-owner of a luxury hotel empire. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "Okay, take your time." Victoria stood. "I'm going to call the bank and finalize the refinancing details. Come find me when you're ready." She kissed the top of his head and left. Ethan sat alone in the ballroom, staring at the unfinished floor, trying to process what had just happened. His phone rang. Marcus. "Hey. Did she make you a partner yet?" "How did you—" "Dude, the whole town knows. Eleanor Vance told her hairdresser, who told the mechanic, who told me." Marcus paused. "You gonna take it?" "I don't know. It feels like too much." "It feels like you're scared." "Maybe I am." "Of what? Success?" "Of losing it. Everything I touch eventually falls apart. My marriage, my career. What if this does too?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Or what if it doesn't? What if you finally get something good and you don't sabotage it by being too afraid to hold on?" Ethan closed his eyes. "When did you get smart?" "I've always been smart. You just never listened." Marcus's voice softened. "Take the partnership, man. You earned it. And for once in your life, let yourself have something you deserve." The line went dead. Ethan sat there for another 10 minutes. Then he stood, brushed the sawdust off his jeans, and went to find Victoria. She was in the office, on the phone with someone about insurance premiums. When she saw him in the doorway, she held up one finger. "Yes, I understand. No, that's fine. We'll review the policy next quarter. Thank you. She hung up. That was fast. I want the partnership, Ethan said. Victoria smiled. Yeah? Yeah, on one condition. What's that? I get to take a week off, see my daughter, be a real father for once. Take 2 weeks. Hell, take a month. I don't need a month. I need 7 days and the freedom to not feel guilty about it. Victoria crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. You've got it. And Ethan? Yeah? Bring her here, Emma. Let her see what her dad built. Ethan pulled back. You want to meet my daughter? I want to meet your family. If we're doing this for real, that means all of it. Something in Ethan's chest cracked open. The last wall he'd been holding up finally crumbled. Okay, he said quietly. I'll bring her here. Good. Victoria kissed him. Now let's go sign some paperwork and make you a very wealthy man. They spent the rest of the afternoon with attorneys, signing documents that transferred half ownership of the restoration division into Ethan's name. By the time they finished, the sun was setting, and Ethan was officially a millionaire on paper. It didn't feel real. None of it felt real. But when they got back to the estate that night and collapsed on the couch together, exhausted and relieved and finally safe, Ethan realized maybe it didn't need to feel real yet. Maybe real was something you built slowly, day by day, choice by choice, like a marriage that started as a lie and became the truest thing he'd ever known. Victoria fell asleep against his shoulder while they were watching some movie neither of them was paying attention to. Ethan looked down at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his life in a wedding dress and changed everything, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind, the solid, earned kind that came from surviving disasters and choosing to keep fighting anyway. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. We did it, he whispered. She mumbled something in her sleep that might have been agreement. Outside, the estate grounds were quiet. The hotel was still. And for the first time in 2 months, nothing was on fire. Ethan closed his eyes and let himself rest. 3 weeks after the hearing, Ethan drove to Pennsylvania to pick up his daughter. The house looked smaller than he remembered. Pale yellow siding, chain-link fence, a yard full of plastic toys Emma had outgrown 2 years ago, but her grandparents kept anyway because throwing things away felt wasteful. Ethan sat in the truck for a full minute before getting out, trying to figure out what he was going to say. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that you got married without telling her? That you'd been living in a mansion fighting corporate wars instead of being her dad? The front door opened and Emma came running out. She was taller than the last time he'd seen her, hair longer, wearing a dinosaur shirt he didn't recognize. Dad! She crashed into him and Ethan caught her, lifting her up even though she was getting too big for it. Hey kiddo, miss me? You were gone forever. I know, I'm sorry. His ex-wife's mother appeared in the doorway. Linda. Gray hair, kind eyes. The patience of someone who'd raised 3 kids and lived to tell about it. Ethan, good to see you. Linda, thanks for keeping her. She's family, that's what we do. Linda's expression was carefully neutral. We heard you got married. Yeah, it's complicated. Most marriages are. She glanced at Emma, who was chattering about a school project involving volcanoes. You taking her for the week? If that's okay. Of course, her bag's inside. And Ethan? Linda's voice dropped. Make sure she comes back happy. That's all that matters. The weight of that statement sat heavy in his chest. He nodded. 20 minutes later, they were on the road. Emma buckled in the passenger seat with a backpack full of clothes and a stuffed triceratops named Roger. So where are we going? Emma asked. My place. Well, our place. It's big. You'll like it. Is your wife going to be there? Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. Yeah, she is. Her name's Victoria. Is she nice? Very nice. Is she going to be my mom? The question hit him like a punch. No, sweetheart. You already have a mom. Victoria's she's my wife. But you don't have to call her anything you don't want to. You can just call her Victoria. Emma thought about this. Does she like dinosaurs? I don't know. You'll have to ask her. Okay. Emma went back to playing with Roger, apparently satisfied. Ethan drove and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. They arrived at the estate around sunset. Emma's eyes went wide when she saw the house. You live here? Yep. It's huge, like a castle. Kind of. Come on, let's go inside. Victoria was waiting in the foyer wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look softer than the corporate version Emma would have seen in photos. She'd been nervous all day. Ethan could tell from the way she'd rearranged the living room furniture twice and baked cookies she didn't know how to bake. Now she smiled as they walked in. "Hi, you must be Emma." Emma hid behind Ethan's leg. "It's okay," Ethan said gently. "This is Victoria. Remember?" Emma peeked out. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Victoria blinked. Yes, I think they're very cool." "What's your favorite?" The one with the long neck?" "Brachiosaurus," Emma said seriously. "That's a good choice. They're herbivores." "I did not know that." "Most people don't." Emma stepped out from behind Ethan. "Can I see my room?" Victoria's smile widened. "Absolutely. Follow me." She led them upstairs to a guest room Ethan hadn't seen in 3 weeks. It had been completely transformed. New furniture, dinosaur posters on the walls, a bookshelf full of science books, and in the corner, a telescope pointed toward the window. Emma's jaw dropped. "Is this for me?" "If you want it," Victoria said. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I got a little bit of everything. But if you don't like it, we can change it." Emma ran to the telescope. "This is the coolest thing ever." Ethan looked at Victoria. She was watching Emma with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between hope and fear. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I wanted her to feel welcome." "She does. Trust me." Emma spent the next hour exploring while Victoria showed her around the estate. The library, the kitchen, the ballroom that still smelled like fresh varnish. And through it all, Emma asked 1,000 questions that Victoria answered with surprising patience. By the time they sat down for dinner, takeout pizza because none of them felt like cooking, Emma was chattering nonstop about constellations and fossils and whether the estate had any secret passages. "Probably," Victoria said. "The house is over 100 years old. I haven't found any yet, but that doesn't mean they're not there." "Can we look?" "Tomorrow. It's getting late." Emma yawned, proving Victoria's point. After dinner, Ethan got Emma ready for bed. She brushed her teeth, put on pajamas covered in cartoon T-Rexes, and climbed into the new bed with Roger tucked under her arm. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "I like Victoria. She's nice." "I'm glad." "Are you going to stay married to her?" Ethan sat on the edge of the bed. "That's the plan." "Good. She made me a dinosaur room. That means she's a keeper." He laughed and kissed her forehead. "Good night, kiddo." "Night, Dad." He turned off the light and found Victoria waiting in the hallway. "She's asleep?" Victoria whispered. "Out cold." They walked back downstairs together. In the kitchen, Victoria started cleaning up the pizza boxes with unnecessary focus. "You did great today," Ethan said. "I was terrified." "Couldn't tell. I've negotiated $1 million deals and I've never been that nervous." She threw away a napkin. "What if she hated me? What if I said the wrong thing? What if—" Ethan caught her hand. "She likes you, she told me. You're officially a keeper." Victoria's eyes went bright. "She said that?" Word for word. "Because of the dinosaur room?" "Because you tried. That's what matters." Victoria leaned against him. "I've never been around kids before. I don't know what I'm doing." "Welcome to parenting. None of us do." She laughed softly. "How long can she stay?" 2 weeks, if that's okay." "More than okay. I like having her here." Victoria looked up at him. "I like having both of you here." Ethan kissed her, slow and careful, like they had all the time in the world. When they pulled apart, Victoria was smiling. "What?" Ethan asked. "Nothing, just this feels right, the 3 of us. Like a real family." "It is a real family." "I know. I'm still getting used to it." They stood in the kitchen holding each other while the house settled into quiet around them. And for the first time since this whole thing started, Ethan let himself believe it might actually work. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost surreal. Emma explored every corner of the estate. Victoria taught her how to make pancakes that were only slightly burned. Ethan took them both into town for ice cream and endured Emma's detailed lecture on why Triceratops was better than Stegosaurus, while Victoria tried not to laugh. They found a rhythm, breakfast together. Emma doing homework at the kitchen table while Victoria worked on her laptop. Ethan finishing repairs around the hotel, dinner as a family, movie nights where Emma fell asleep halfway through and Ethan carried her upstairs. It was domestic and chaotic and imperfect. It was everything Ethan hadn't known he wanted. One afternoon, Victoria found Emma in the library reading a book about paleontology. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Emma looked up. "Okay." "Do you like it here? Be honest." "I love it here. You have a million books and Dad's happy, and you made me a dinosaur room." Emma paused. "Are you asking because you want me to leave?" "What? No, the opposite. I'm asking because I want you to come back, after you go home to your grandparents, maybe visit on weekends or holidays. Whatever works." Emma's face lit up. "Really?" "Really, if your dad says it's okay. He'll say yes. He always says yes when I ask for dinosaur stuff." Victoria laughed. "Good to know." That night, after Emma was asleep, Victoria and Ethan sat on the back porch watching stars. "I told Emma she could visit whenever she wants," Victoria said. "I heard. Thank you." "I meant it. She's part of this now, part of us." Ethan took her hand. "You know this changes everything, right? If she's coming here regularly, we can't pretend this is temporary anymore. We have to be all in." "I am all in. I have been for a while." "Even knowing I come with a 7-year-old who talks about fossils at breakfast?" "Especially knowing that." Victoria looked at him. "I love you, Ethan. I should have said it before now, but I was scared you'd leave. Scared this would fall apart like everything else, but I'm done being scared." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. The last piece of armor he'd been carrying finally fell away. "I love you too. I've loved you since the night you showed up in that wedding dress and trusted me to help you when you had no reason to." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "We're really doing this. For real." "Yeah, for real." They kissed under the stars while the estate stretched out around them. This massive, impossible place that had started as a battleground and become a home. When Emma left 2 weeks later, she cried at the door. "I don't want to go back." "I know, sweetheart, but Grandma and Grandpa miss you, and you've got school." "Can I come back for Christmas?" Ethan looked at Victoria. She nodded. "Yeah, Christmas. We'll come get you." "Promise?" "Promise." Emma hugged Victoria so hard she nearly knocked her over. "Bye, Victoria. Thanks for the dinosaur room." "Anytime, kiddo." The drive back to Pennsylvania was quieter. Emma fell asleep an hour in, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. When they arrived, Linda was waiting on the porch. "She have a good time?" "The best." Ethan carried Emma's bag to the door. "She wants to come back for Christmas." "That okay with your wife?" "More than okay." Linda studied his face. "You look different, Ethan. Happier?" "I am." "Good. You deserve it." She took the bag. "I'll tell Emma's mother you'll call about the Christmas schedule." "Thanks, Linda." He hugged Emma goodbye. She barely woke up and drove back to Greystone feeling lighter than he had in years. When he got to the estate, Victoria was in the ballroom hanging final decorations for the hotel's official reopening. "How'd it go?" She cried, but she's excited about Christmas. "Me too." Victoria climbed down from the ladder. "The reopening's tomorrow. You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." The next evening, the Sinclair Grand Hotel opened its doors to the public for the first time in 18 months. Guests arrived in evening wear. Local press showed up with cameras. Eleanor Vance gave a speech about resilience and tradition. And in the center of it all, Victoria stood next to Ethan, looking like she'd finally stopped fighting gravity. The ballroom was perfect, every chandelier gleaming, every floorboard solid, every wall restored to its original glory. It was the kind of work that should have taken a year. They'd done it in 3 months. Around midnight, after the guests had left and the staff had cleaned up, Victoria and Ethan stood alone in the empty ballroom. "We did it," Victoria said softly. "You sound surprised." "I am. I spent so long convinced I'd lose everything. And instead," she gestured at the room, "instead, I gained everything." Ethan pulled her close. "You earned it. Every bit. We earned it." They danced in the empty ballroom without music, just the sound of their breathing and the echo of their footsteps on the floor Ethan had rebuilt with his own hands. "I have something for you." Victoria said. It's not my birthday. I know, but I wanted to do this now. She pulled an envelope from her pocket. Open it. Inside was a legal document. Ethan scanned it and his breath caught. This is 50% ownership of the hotel, not just the restoration division, the entire property, effective immediately. Victoria, you can't. I already did. Signed and filed this morning. You're not just my husband and business partner anymore. You're co-owner of the Sinclair Grand Hotel. Equal partners in everything. Ethan stared at the document. This is worth tens of millions. I know what it's worth, and you've earned every penny. She took his face in her hands. You saved this place, Ethan. You saved me. Let me give you what you deserve. I don't deserve this? Yes, you do. You're the only person who's ever believed in me without wanting something in return. The only person who stayed when staying was hard. The only person who... Her voice cracked. The only person who made me remember what it feels like to not be alone. Ethan pulled her against his chest and held on while she cried. You're not alone, he said quietly. You're never going to be alone again. That's what marriage means, real marriage. The kind we built instead of the kind we planned. Victoria looked up at him with tears on her face and smiled. Best fake marriage I've ever been in. Only fake marriage you've ever been in. True, but still the best. They stood in the ballroom until dawn started creeping through the windows, planning the future they'd fought so hard to build. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning in June, Ethan woke up to the smell of burning pancakes and Emma's laughter echoing through the estate. He found them in the kitchen, Victoria covered in flour, Emma wearing an apron 3 sizes too big, and a smoke detector beeping frantically. What happened? We tried to make breakfast, Emma said. It went bad. I can see that. Victoria waved a towel at the smoke detector. In my defense, your daughter is a terrible sous chef. Hey, you're the one who forgot to flip them. I was distracted by your dinosaur facts. Ethan laughed and took over, making eggs while Victoria and Emma cleaned up the disaster. This was his life now. Sunday mornings with his wife and daughter. A hotel that was actually making money. A business partnership that felt less like work and more like building something that mattered. Legal battles with Damien were still ongoing, but their lawyers said the case was solid. Catherine Sinclair had come to Christmas dinner and only insulted Ethan twice, which Victoria counted as a victory. And Marcus had started dating the hotel's event coordinator, which meant Ethan had to endure weekly updates about their relationship whether he wanted them or not. It was messy, complicated, imperfect. It was real. After breakfast, they drove into town for Emma's soccer game. Victoria had never been to a kid's soccer game before and spent the first 10 minutes asking questions about the rules until Emma told her to just watch and cheer. Ethan sat between them on the bleachers, watching his daughter chase a ball across a muddy field, and felt something he'd spent his whole life searching for finally click into place. Peace. Not the kind that came from having everything figured out. The kind that came from accepting that you never would and choosing to show up anyway. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. What are you thinking about? How lucky I am. Luck had nothing to do with it. You answered the phone. You showed up in a storm. You stayed when any sane person would have run. Maybe I'm not sane. Maybe you're exactly what I needed. Emma scored a goal and they both jumped up cheering. She waved from the field, grinning so wide her face looked like it might split in half. She's happy, Victoria said quietly. Yeah, she is. Are you? Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd crashed into his life wearing a wedding dress in desperation, who'd bet everything on a stranger's kindness, who taught him that love wasn't about being perfect, it was about choosing to stay when staying was hard. Yeah, he said. I really am. That night, after Emma was asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan and Victoria sat in the library going through renovation plans for the second property, a small inn on the coast that the company had just acquired. We should keep the original windows, Victoria said, pointing at the blueprints. They're part of the character. They're also 70 years old, and half of them don't close properly. So fix them, that's what you do. Ethan smiled. Yes, ma'am. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that came from knowing each other well enough that words weren't always necessary. Eventually, Victoria set down her pen and looked at him. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me that day? Walking into this disaster? Ethan thought about it, really thought about it, about the sleepless nights and maxed credit cards and the fear that had lived in his chest for months, about punching Damien and yelling at Catherine and fighting battles he'd never asked for, about Emma's dinosaur room and Victoria's smile and the way it felt to wake up next to someone who chose him every single day. No, he said simply, not even once. Even when I was impossible? Especially then. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I love you. I love you too. No, I mean, I love you in the way that scares me, the way that makes me want to build a whole life around you and trust that you won't leave when it gets hard. I won't leave. I'm not built that way. I know. That's what scares me. Because if I lose you, you won't. You can't promise that. Yeah, I can. Because I'm not going anywhere, Victoria. Not when things are good, and definitely not when they're hard. That's what this is. That's what we built. He stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her in the middle of the library, surrounded by books and blueprints and the evidence of the future they were planning together. We started with a lie, he said quietly, a fake marriage designed to save your company. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being fake. It became the realest thing in my life, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Victoria kissed him, long and slow and full of promises they'd both keep. Thank you, she whispered against his lips. For what? For answering the phone that night, for coming to get me, for staying. Always, Ethan said. I'll always stay. And he meant it. Because some marriages start with romance and flowers and carefully planned futures. And some marriages start with a desperate phone call in a storm, a woman in a ruined wedding dress, and a man who decided that showing up was more important than playing it safe. Both kinds can work. But the second kind, the kind built on crisis and choice, and the decision to keep fighting even when everything's falling apart, that kind teaches you something the first kind never will. It teaches you that love isn't about perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It's about choosing someone when choosing them is hard, when it costs you everything, when walking away would be easier and staying might destroy you. It's about standing in the wreckage of someone else's life and saying, I'm here, and meaning it. That's what Ethan learned in the ballroom he rebuilt with bleeding hands and borrowed money. That's what Victoria learned when a stranger showed up in a storm and refused to leave. And that's what they taught each other in the months and years that followed. That the best things in life are never safe or easy or guaranteed. They're messy and terrifying and built on faith that someone will catch you when you fall. 3 years later, Ethan stood in a different ballroom in a different city, holding Emma's hand while Victoria gave a keynote speech at a hospitality industry conference. My company nearly failed, Victoria was saying, not because of market conditions or bad luck, but because I was carrying everything alone and pretending I had all the answers. The moment things started turning around was the moment I stopped pretending and asked for help. Emma tugged on Ethan's sleeve. She's talking about you. I know. You saved her company. We saved it together. On stage, Victoria smiled at them. Someone once told me that showing up is 90% of success. I didn't believe them at the time. But I've learned that showing up, really showing up, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, is the most important thing you can do. For your business, for your family, for yourself. The audience applauded. Ethan squeezed Emma's hand and thought about the night this all started. The rain, the text message, the choice to answer. He'd saved Victoria that night, but she'd saved him too, from a life of playing it safe. From the fear that he'd never be enough. From the belief that good things only happen to other people. She taught him that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that make no sense, the ones you make with your heart instead of your head, the ones that terrify you and thrill you and change everything. And he'd taught her that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. After the conference, they flew home to Greystone. The estate had expanded over the years. 2 new properties, a full restoration team, and enough success that the financial battles felt like distant memories. But the original hotel still stood at the center of everything, the building Ethan had saved with scaffolding and stubbornness. That night, they walked through the empty ballroom together, just the 2 of them. Remember when this floor was falling apart? Victoria said. I try not to. I was so scared I thought I'd lose everything. But you didn't. Because of you. Ethan pulled her close. Because of us. They stood in the center of the ballroom, swaying without music, just like they had 3 years ago when everything was falling apart and they were too stubborn to let it. I'd do it all again, Victoria said. Every disaster, every battle, all of it, just to end up here. Even the part where you ran away from your wedding in the rain? Especially that part. She looked up at him. Because it brought me to you. Ethan kissed her, long and deep and full of everything they'd survived together. Best storm I ever drove into, he said. Victoria laughed. Best text message I ever sent. They stayed in the ballroom until the sun came up, talking about nothing and everything, planning futures and remembering disasters. And when they finally walked out hand in hand, leaving the ghosts of their past behind, Ethan realized this was the lesson he'd been trying to learn his whole life. You can't control the storms, but you can choose who you weather them with. And if you choose right, if you choose someone who shows up when showing up is terrifying, who stays when staying is hard, who fights for you even when they barely know you, then the storms stop being disasters. They become the beginning of something worth fighting for. That's what he found in a flooded ballroom with a woman in a ruined wedding dress. Not a fake marriage, a real partnership, the kind built on choice and courage and the radical decision to believe that love is worth the risk. And 3 years later, standing in the same ballroom holding the same woman, Ethan knew without a doubt that he'd made the right choice. Every single time.